Time now for your easy choice, presented by Geico, to get you set for your starts and sits for Week 16. Dave, it's the fantasy semifinals.
For most people.
For most people. Hopefully everybody's still watching.
What do you tell people if it's
championship?
What do you tell people if it's the first round of their playoffs and their championship game is in Week 18 instead of 17?
I tell them to change their commissioner and get a better playoff format. So you should be doing your playoffs. Week 15 is the first round, Week 16 the semifinals, and then championship in Week 17. All right, let's get right to it with the start of the week for Week 16. We're looking at Ken Walker here with an opportunity to build off what he did last week. It was one of those games where I was a little surprised by how he performed against Philadelphia. Very good run defense, but first rushing touchdown since Week 6. He now has 7 catches in his last 2 games. I hope that's not a Drew Lock thing. I hope it's just more of an offensive thing, but getting involved in the passing game with 8 targets. And here comes the Tennessee Titans. Without Jeffrey Simmons, their run defense has absolutely fallen apart. You saw Raheem Mostert 2 games ago with 96 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. He does that against a lot of teams. But then Devin Singletary went for 121 yards against this Titans defense. And Walker is in a great spot, playing a little bit more than Zach Charbonnet. I would like to see that split a little bit different, at least for this week. But Ken Walker is in a great spot to lead fantasy managers to a championship. So I'm on board, you're on board. Heath Cummings, not so much. Sportsline, not so much. But I do think this is going to be a huge week for Ken Walker against Titans.
I love the way that he looked last week. Everybody saw the game. He was just running with fresh legs. You could tell it was the second game back. Knocked the rust off from the week before. And how about this? Remember in the offseason after the NFL draft, we were worried, oh, is he going to play on passing downs anymore? Probably not. Is he going to work at the goal line? Well, you know what? He's played on 18 of 23 snaps inside the 5 when he's been on the field this year. 2 games missed. Obviously, Charbonnet had a huge edge there. So he's the short yardage guy in the red zone, and he also is catching a couple of passes. And I think he takes off 5.1 yards per carry the Titans have allowed since Jeffrey Simmons has been out. Stay away, Jeffrey Simmons. Start Kenneth Walker.
Did miss practice on Wednesday. We'll find out what his status is moving forward. But as of now, trending in the direction of Simmons not being there and Walker hopefully having a big game. All right, Dave, let's talk about your starts. And we know Jamar Chase has been ruled out by the Bengals as they take on the Steelers. So that's a big loss for the Bengals. So just in terms of taking the place of Jamar Chase, T. Higgins last week, 2 touchdowns, had a monster game. How is he going to do against the Steelers in this matchup, as he is one of your starts?
He had a monster fourth quarter and overtime, nearly a 30% target share then. And Jamar Chase was playing into the fourth quarter, Jamey. He just became the man for the Cincinnati Bengals passing game. And Jake Browning started to play a little bit better himself, started to throw further downfield than he had in the prior few games. And now he's taking on a Steelers defense. They're not going to have Cameron Hayward. It looks that way, that he's not going to be there. Cam Hayward won't be rushing the passer.
Actually, Hayward cleared the concussion protocol.
Did he? So he is going to play. All right, that's an issue, but that's an issue for Browning more so than it is for Higgins. What is definitely happening in Pittsburgh is that both starting safeties aren't playing in this game.
Yep.
One suspended, the other one's out. So fresh starting safeties. I know there's a Joey Porter issue there. I look at opportunity. I look at volume for T. Higgins. He is a low-end wide receiver, too, this week, a top 24 guy.
Yep, hopefully this is the game where he goes out and earns his money. He's the alpha for this week, and so you want to be paid like a number 1 wide receiver heading into free agency. This is the game to go do it. All right, so he is one of your starts. So the rest of your starts here, Dave, for Week 16. Joe Flacco is on this list, continuing hopefully a strong performance for him. We differ a little bit on James Conner. You like him, I don't. We'll talk about that in a second. Ezekiel Elliott, T. Higgins, as we already addressed, and Isaiah Likely. So let's get into Joe Flacco, because 3 straight games of being a good fantasy quarterback. Will he be a great fantasy quarterback against the Texans? And give me some guys you would start him over.
I would start him over Russell Wilson. I would start him over Kyler Murray. Basically any quarterback where I'm concerned about him getting to 20 fantasy points, that's 200 yards and 2 touchdowns and no turnovers, that's where I would draw the line, and that's where Flacco is for me. I hated the way he looked last week. Not only did he have 3 interceptions, there were another 4 passes that could have been picked off that he threw. But he's getting the ball a ton. This Cleveland offense, the 2nd highest pass rate in the National Football League since he's taken over under center. It's amazing. They want to throw the ball. They're leaning on Joe Flacco. The Texans aren't going to have Jimmy Ward. Their pass defense is worse when he's not on the field.
He actually practiced today.
He did too?
Yeah.
What's going on with all these practicing players getting in there? Did he clear concussion protocol?
I don't know, but he is practicing.
Makes me want to double-check Joe Flacco as a must-start type of fantasy quarterback, but he is a low-end QB who does have potential to get that 20-point potential. Who else is practicing today? What else you got for me?
Well, James Conner's been practicing, so that's a good thing. So you like him as a start taking on the Bears?
I do. He's given us at least 17 PPR points each of the last 2 weeks. He's averaging 20 21 touches per game. He's getting a lot of work there, 20 PPR points per game. And we doubted him against Pittsburgh, his old team. He came through. We doubted him against San Francisco. He came through. And one of the secret reasons why he came through against San Francisco was the offensive line playing strong. And you might tell me right now that his offensive line is hurt and they're not practicing or something like that. But I do think that offensive line is actually healthy. I think James Conner's going to get a lot of opportunities to play well. And I think this Bears defense, the one area where I think that they have struggled is against the run. You look at their past 4 games, 4.4 yards per carry, 3 touchdowns allowed to running backs. The Lions did a lot of damage against them. This isn't an offense that's as good as the Lions, but James Conner's been playing well. I don't mind trusting him as a number 2 running back this week.
I'm just a little bit concerned because the work in the passing game is basically non-existent. He's got 9 catches for 9 yards.
He's averaging 2.5 catches per game.
Since Kyler Murray has come back, it's 9 catches for 9 yards.
Oh,
so he's not doing a lot.
It's a good thing we get more than receiving yards in fantasy.
If the touchdowns disappear, because that's kind of what saved him last week, if the touchdowns are gone, and last week he ran against a 49ers team that's really good against the run, but no Armstead and no Hargrave. This defense, I think, as a run-stopping defense, better than the 49ers last week. And so I think this defense is going to contain him because they don't have to fear the passing game the way that Kyler Murray's playing right now. So I'm a little bit concerned about Conner. I think he'll get you about 7-8 points. Not a lot of work in the passing game. I think it's going to be a disappointing game for him based on the last 2. Now, I've been wrong on him the last 2, so take that for what it's worth.
Right. I'm tired of being wrong on him, so I'm going with him.
I understand it. Starts for me this week. A guy that I did not expect to be starting, one in particular, is Derrick Henry. I thought it was going to be a bad game for him, but I turned the corner a little bit based on the matchup, and I think some extra things that play we'll talk about in a second. Baker Mayfield's been hot, 61 fantasy points in his last 2 games coming to this matchup against Jacksonville. Fantastic. Drake London, he loves playing at home. Chris Godwin, he's on fire the last 2 weeks, 23 targets in his last 2 games. Should be fun to see how Baker and Chris Godwin connect if you want to go with a little stack on DFS. And then Jordan Addison, great game with Nick Mullins and Justin Jefferson on the field. And the way to beat Detroit, if they are going to beat Detroit, is through the air. They will not have a lot of success running on the Lions. They'll have to throw. So Addison is a good borderline number 2, number 3 wide receiver. Let's talk about Derrick Henry for a second because, again, started the week not liking him. However, he is 116 yards away from his 6th 1,000-yard season, and I think that matters to Mike Vrabel to get that possibly done this week. They have another home game in Week 18 against Jacksonville, but they are eliminated for playoff contention. He's already talked about this might be his last season in Tennessee as an impending free agent. But really, it's about the Seattle defense. 7 of the last 8 running backs against them. 12.9 PPR points or more. I think Henry will get into the end zone and have an opportunity to perform at a high enough level that you can still trust him as a number 2 running back. I know we haven't said that very much lately, but I do think that will be the case. And then in terms of Drake London, Dave, I'm going to
like this. Go ahead.
We'll see how he does with Taylor Heineke. Now, he missed the first start for Heineke. It was Week 9 against Minnesota. That game would have been a little telling because not only against a good defense, but also at home. He absolutely loves playing at home. The road home splits are dramatic. He's averaging over 19 fantasy points per game at home. If you remove, we're going to Azer stat this, remove the Carolina game in Week 1. But in his last 6 home games, over 19 fantasy points per game. Hasn't had a game under 14 PPR points. And this matchup, while it's a little tough, Colts are top 10 in terms of fewest fantasy points allowed to opposing wide receivers. I don't care. I'm going to start him and start him with confidence as a number 1 wide receiver in this matchup.
Number 1?
Yeah.
Not number 2.
No, he's a top 12 wide receiver for me, so I know you like him as well.
I do, and it's really more about the game script and what I think is going to happen. Call me crazy. I think the Falcons are going to be chasing points against Indianapolis in this game, and I think we'll see Drake London get a lot of opportunities from Taylor Heineke. They've only played 23 snaps together, still 3 targets on those 23 snaps, so there's going to be huge opportunities downfield for Drake London.
All right, go from starts to sits, and I'll go first here with the guys that I'm trying to avoid. And while I like Derrick Henry, another older running back I would like to avoid is Austin Eckler. So I know that's difficult to say. He might have gotten you to your fantasy semifinals, but I would like to sit him again. You see James Conner on this list. Dave and I, again, disagree on that one. Jordan Love, tough matchup against the Panthers. He's been very solid with 4 of his last 5 games over 20 fantasy points. The Panthers, however, are great at limiting opposing passing games, mostly because you can run on them. Terry McLaurin gets the Jets. That's a no bueno for me. And then Zay Flowers, tough matchup for him, taking on the 49ers. He could see a lot of Charvarius Ward, and I think that will be tough for him as a rookie coming off a difficult game last week in a great matchup against Jacksonville. In terms of Austin Eckler, I think we all sort of forget what he's done really for the majority of the last month and a half. He's had 1 good game in his last 5. It was against Denver. Everybody does well against Denver. And Austin Eckler coming off a game where we know the first game without Justin Herbert, it was bad, 63-21, the loss that they took against the Raiders. But he also was sharing not just with Josh Kelly, he was also sharing with Isaiah Spiller. And we could see more of a 3-headed backfield for the Chargers as they take on a good Bills defense that just shut down Tony Pollard. In terms of Terry McLaurin, Dave, he was awesome last week. We saw the last time we saw him Week 13, he said, what happened? You only had 3 targets. I ran a lot of cardio. So we knew there was a squeaky wheel game coming.
Yeah.
And he took advantage of that Rams defense. Now he's got to take on this defense for the Jets. I think it's going to be tough. I know they just gave it the big play to Jalen Waddle. Top wide receivers, the best of the best, have done well against this Jets defense, not from a touchdown standpoint because they've only given up 4 touchdowns. But I don't know if McLaurin qualifies. And Sam Howell, we don't know what's going on there with him. We saw McLaurin catch the touchdown from Jacoby Brissett last week. Should have had 2. But this is a matchup I think you don't necessarily have to say I'm starting him in a 2 wide receiver league. 3 wide receiver league you're starting him, but 2 wide receiver league I'm sitting.
Do you have a couple of receivers that you would start ahead of Terry McLaurin that aren't non-obvious guys?
Jordan Addison would
that's
be one.
That's interesting.
I'll tell you what, if Nico Collins was out, I would have started Noah Brown ahead of him.
Well, if Nico Collins is going to play,
I would start Nico Collins over Terry
that's
McLaurin.
a good one. Hey, what about Curtis Samuel?
No.
Same team,
No.
even in full PPR?
No, it's been the alpha outside guys that have done well against the Jets, not the players like Samuel who are more interior type receivers.
Okay, one more. Calvin Ridley.
I would start Ridley over McLaurin.
I would too. And listen, I think
Especially if
McLaurin.
Trevor Lawrence plays.
I think, yes, that goes without saying. I think McLaurin is a great talent at wide receiver. I'm getting nervous about how aggressive this offense is going to be throwing the football. 2 straight weeks where they haven't thrown as much as they had earlier in the season. It's almost like they know that they're going to lose and they just want to run their offense and see what they have in it. They actually competed last week. They came close to competing and maybe even tying the game against the Rams, and it was because of McLaurin. So I'd like to think that there will be an opportunity for him to go in there and play and do well, but the Jets matchup is tough.
You mentioned Ridley. He's on your sit list along with a couple of running backs in Jerome Ford, Javonte Williams. You got DeAndre Hopkins, Dallas Goedert. Why are we sitting Ridley?
Because of C.J. Beathard, mainly. We know that C.J. Beathard is not as good of a thrower as Trevor Lawrence, and if Trevor Lawrence practices, Jamey, you might tell me right now that Trevor Lawrence is practicing. I'd love to hear it. I would move Calvin Ridley up because that matchup is so good. But Beathard doesn't read the defense as well, doesn't have nearly as strong of an arm, makes me nervous to go with Ridley, who, by the way, 25 targets in his last 2 games, 9 catches, not even 100 yards.
Dallas Goedert is someone just to completely avoid?
I think so. I just think that he's just not a huge part of this offense. I know the matchup is favorable all the way around for Philadelphia. They could run the ball again like they did last week against the G-Men.
It's been tough to trust him. You know, we thought when he came back from the forearm injury 3 games ago, it'd be okay, maybe 1 game and then get going, and then last week did not do anything against Seattle. You know, I was disappointed. Jamal Adams did not play. I thought that'd be a matchup that they could exploit. Unfortunately did not. So we'll see how they do against the Giants, but the Giants have actually been really good against opposing tight ends, and Goddard's history, not good against the Giants. 17 catches for like 170 yards in the last 5 games, no touchdowns. So Giants do a good job of keeping Dallas Goedert out of the end zone. Make sure you check out our Fantasy Football Today podcast, the best podcast in the business. We have our YouTube streams that you can also check out as well, but we are helping you get those last-minute lineup suggestions right. And you can check out our live stream tonight. What time is it, Dave?
7:30
7:30
Eastern Time, 4:30 in Cali.
Leading up to kickoff to get you set for the Rams and the Saints, the Fantasy Football Today podcast, the best podcast in the business.